The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. $500. That was the fine the homeowners association decided my vegetable garden warranted. But what they didn't know was that I had already spent 3 weeks documenting every single violation they themselves were committing. 47 of them. And I was about to make sure everyone knew. This is a story about what happens when power-hungry people on a small board think they can control everyone around them. It's about standing up when you're told to sit down. And it's about discovering that sometimes the people enforcing the rules are the ones breaking them the most. My name is Rebekah, and this is how I took down an entire HOA board with nothing but a camera, a spreadsheet, and the truth. I moved into Riverside Meadows 3 years ago. It was one of those planned communities that looked perfect in the brochures. Manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, strict architectural guidelines that supposedly maintained property values. I was 29 at the time, working as a data analyst, and I had saved for years to afford my first home. The HOA seemed reasonable at first. Monthly fees of $250. Rules about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and parking. Standard stuff that I actually appreciated. I wanted to live somewhere that felt organized and well-maintained. The board consisted of 5 people. Margaret was the president, a woman in her early 60s who had lived in the community since it was built 15 years earlier. She treated HOA meetings like personal fiefdoms. Then there was David, the vice president, who owned a landscaping company and somehow always got the contracts for common area maintenance. The other 3 members rotated, but they mostly just nodded along with whatever Margaret wanted. For the first 2 years I kept my head down. I followed every rule in the covenant. I painted my shutters the approved shade of colonial blue. I never parked on the street overnight. I kept my grass at exactly 2.5 inches like the guidelines specified. I even volunteered for the neighborhood watch committee. But last spring something changed. I had been reading about food security and wanted to grow some of my own vegetables. My backyard was decent sized and I thought a small raised bed garden would be perfect. I checked the HOA covenants 3 times. There was nothing prohibiting vegetable gardens as long as they were in the backyard and not visible from the street. I built 4 raised beds in my back corner, totally screened by my fence. I planted tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, herbs. It became my therapy after long days staring at spreadsheets. Every evening I would come home, change clothes, and spend an hour tending to my plants. For 3 months it was perfect. Then Margaret showed up for a routine inspection in late June. She claimed she had received a complaint from a neighbor about my backyard being unkempt. I knew that was garbage because my yard was immaculate, but HOA presidents could conduct inspections if they claimed reasonable cause. She walked around my property with a clipboard making notes. When she got to my garden beds, she stopped. Her face twisted into this expression of disgust, like I had created a trash heap instead of a thriving vegetable garden. She made more notes, took photos with her phone, and left without saying a word to me. The violation notice arrived 4 days later. According to Margaret, my garden violated Section 8, subsection C of the covenants, which prohibited unsightly structures or improvements that diminish neighborhood aesthetics. The fine was $500 and I had 30 days to remove the garden or face additional penalties of $100 per week. I was furious. I read Section 8, subsection C at least 20 times. It was clearly intended for things like broken down cars or deteriorating sheds, not a well-maintained vegetable garden in a fenced backyard. But the covenant gave the board sole discretion to determine what constituted a violation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Margaret's smug expression as she had photographed my garden. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Not just unfair but strategically targeted. I decided to fight back, but I needed to be smart about it. I requested a hearing with the board, which was my right under the covenants. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving me time to prepare my defense. But I didn't just prepare a defense. I started investigating. The first thing I did was obtain copies of all HOA violation notices for the past 2 years. These were supposed to be available to any homeowner upon request. It took Margaret's assistant 5 days to provide them, and when they arrived, they were poorly organized and missing information. I spent an entire weekend creating a database. I logged every violation, who received it, what the alleged infraction was, and what the fine amount was. Patterns started emerging immediately. Homeowners who had ever questioned the board received violations at 3 times the rate of homeowners who stayed quiet. The violations issued to board members themselves were always dismissed or reduced to warnings. Ann David's landscaping company had received $230,000 in contracts over the past 2 years, despite the covenants requiring competitive bidding for any contract over $10,000. But I wanted more than just paperwork. I wanted visual proof. I started taking walks around the neighborhood every evening with my phone. I photographed everything. It started as general documentation, but within the first week, I began noticing violations everywhere. And not small ones. Margaret's own property had an unpermitted deck addition that violated the setback requirements. I confirmed this by checking the county building permits database. No permit had ever been filed. David had commercial vehicles parked in his driveway overnight, which violated Section 12 of the covenants. The same section he had used to fine another homeowner just 4 months earlier. Another board member, Patricia, had installed decorative window shutters in a color that wasn't on the approved list. She was literally on the architectural review committee that enforced that rule. I documented 47 separate violations being committed by board members, their immediate family members, or homeowners who had donated to their re-election campaigns. Everything from improper mailbox colors to unapproved fence materials to lawn height violations to prohibited yard ornaments. The more I found, the angrier I became. These people had created a system where they could harass anyone who didn't fall in line while exempting themselves and their friends from the very rules they enforced. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case. I created a presentation with photos, covenant citations, permit records, and contract documents. I practiced my delivery until I could present the information calmly and factually without letting my rage show through. 3 days before my hearing, I made copies of everything and sent a complete packet to every homeowner in Riverside Meadows. 218 homes. I used certified mail so there would be proof of delivery. The packet included a cover letter explaining my situation, the evidence of selective enforcement, the documentation of board member violations, and an invitation to attend my hearing. The night before my hearing, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Homeowners I had never spoken to were calling to thank me. Several people shared their own stories of being targeted by the board. One couple had been fined repeatedly for their children's outdoor toys, even though board member David had a boat parked in his driveway for months at a time. Margaret called me directly. Her voice was shaking with anger. She accused me of harassment, threatened to sue me for defamation, and said my violation fine was being increased to $1,000 for my antagonistic behavior toward the board. I recorded the call. I had already consulted with an attorney who confirmed I was within my rights to document and share factual information about HOA activities. The hearing was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening in the community center. Normally these hearings drew maybe 5 or 6 people. That night, over 100 homeowners showed up. They packed the main room, filled the hallway, and stood outside the doors. Margaret looked like she had seen a ghost when she walked in and saw the crowd. The other board members seemed equally unsettled. They tried to start the meeting, but people kept interrupting with questions about the violations I had documented. When it was finally my turn to present, the room went silent. I set up my laptop and projector. I had created a 40-minute presentation, but I knew I needed to make it shorter given the crowd size. I started with the basics. I explained my garden, showed photos of how well maintained it was, and cited the specific covenant language that I believed permitted it. I argued that the board's interpretation of unsightly structures was subjective and being applied inconsistently. Then I shifted gears. I brought up the violation database I had created. I showed the statistical analysis proving selective enforcement based on whether homeowners had ever challenged the board. The room erupted. People started shouting questions at Margaret. She tried to maintain control, banging her gavel and demanding order, but no one was listening anymore. I continued. I displayed photos of Margaret's unpermitted deck, David's commercial vehicles, Patricia's non-compliant shutters. I showed the contract records proving David's company had received hundreds of thousands of dollars without proper bidding. David actually stood up and left. He didn't say a word, just grabbed his briefcase and walked out. Patricia looked like she was going to cry. Margaret tried to shut down the meeting, but the homeowners wouldn't let her. Person after person stood up and shared their own stories of being harassed by the board. A retired veteran talked about being fined for flying an American flag that was supposedly too large. A single mother described being threatened with foreclosure over a $100 parking violation. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, 17 homeowners had signed a petition demanding the immediate recall of all 5 board members. Over the next week, I worked with a group of concerned homeowners to organize the recall effort. Under our covenants, we needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote. We had that within 72 hours. We also filed complaints with the county about the unpermitted construction and improper bidding processes. I provided all my documentation to the county inspector's office and the district attorney's office. But I wanted to make sure the next board would actually represent homeowners, not just become another corrupt power structure. We drafted proposed amendments to the covenants that would require all violation determinations to include photographic evidence and specific covenant citations. Establish an independent appeals process for homeowners disputing violations. Mandate competitive bidding for all contracts over $5,000 with public disclosure. Prohibit board members from having financial interests in vendors doing business with the HOA. Require annual independent audits of HOA finances. Create term limits for board positions. We needed 60% of homeowners to approve amendments. I spent 2 weeks going door to door explaining the changes and answering questions. Many people were skeptical that anything would really change, but the turnout at my hearing had created momentum. I also prepared for the possibility that Margaret and her allies would try to retaliate. I documented every interaction, kept copies of all emails and letters, and made sure multiple people had backups of all my evidence. The recall vote was held 6 weeks after my hearing. It required a special meeting with strict procedural requirements. Margaret tried every trick she could think of to delay or prevent the vote, but our attorney had reviewed everything and we had followed the rules perfectly. On voting day, 203 homeowners showed up. That was a 93% turnout. The recall passed with 87% voting yes. All 5 board members were removed immediately. Temporary board members were appointed from among homeowners who had never served before, and a special election was scheduled for 60 days out. But the real victory came 2 weeks later when the covenant amendments went to a vote. We held information sessions, distributed detailed explanations, and made ourselves available to answer any questions. The amendments passed with 72% approval. The county investigation moved more slowly, But 4 months later, David's landscaping company was banned from doing any government contract work for 5 years due to improper bidding practices. Margaret was ordered to either obtain a permit for her deck or remove it. She chose to remove it. The DA's office declined to file criminal charges, but the public record of the investigation was enough to ensure none of the former board members could run for any position again. I ran for the new board in the special election and won. So did 4 other homeowners who had been part of the recall effort. Our first action as a board was to formally rescind my garden violation and refund my $500 fine. Our second action was to vote on a resolution apologizing to all homeowners who had been subjected to selective enforcement and offering to review any violations from the past 3 years. 72 violations were reversed. Over $40,000 in fines were refunded. It's been 8 months since the recall vote. Riverside Meadows is a different place now. Board meetings are well attended and actually productive. We've implemented all the covenant amendments and created clear, objective standards for all rules enforcement. My vegetable garden is thriving. Last month, I hosted a community gardening workshop and 12 other homeowners started their own gardens. The old board would have had a collective heart attack, but the new guidelines explicitly permit gardens as long as they're maintained. Margaret moved out of the neighborhood 3 months ago. I heard she's living with her daughter in another state. David's landscaping business lost most of its commercial accounts once word got out about the investigation. Patricia apologized to me personally at a chance meeting in the grocery store. Some homeowners still think I made too big a deal out of a garden. They believe I should have just paid the fine and moved on. But this was never really about tomatoes and zucchini. It was about people in power who believed they were untouchable. It was about a system designed to benefit insiders while punishing anyone who dared to question. It was about standing up when the easy thing would have been to stay silent. The HOA still has rules. We still enforce covenants. But now there's transparency and accountability. Now everyone plays by the same standards. Looking back, I learned that documentation is everything. If I had just complained without evidence, nothing would have changed. But cold, hard facts are difficult to argue with. I learned that there are always more people who want change than you think. They're just waiting for someone to take the first step. Once I stood up, dozens of others found their courage too. I learned that corrupt systems survive on silence and intimidation. The moment you shine a light on them, they start to crumble. Margaret and her board had gotten away with selective enforcement for years because no one had ever compiled the evidence and made it public. I learned that you don't need to be loud or aggressive to be effective. Calm, methodical preparation combined with factual evidence is far more powerful than emotional outbursts. Most importantly, I learned that the size of the injustice doesn't matter. Whether it's a $500 fine or something much larger, standing up against unfairness is always worth it. Because it's never really about the specific issue. It's about the principle that no one should be above the rules they enforce on others. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel. I share strategic revenge stories like this one every week, analyzing how people stood up for themselves when they were treated unfairly. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment telling me what you would have done in Rebekah's situation. Would you have fought back or just paid the fine? I read every comment and your stories often inspire future videos. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.